Hello students, welcome back to your social studies class. In the previous session, we had discussed the meaning of the word government, the need of the government in our society, the various functions performed by the government, the different levels of government, that is the central government, the state government and the local government. And we also discussed about the three organs of government, that is the legislature, the judiciary and the executive. So today students, let's continue with the same chapter. Types of government. Government can be classified into three main types, that is the monarchy, the dictatorship and the democracy. First, let's discuss about the monarchical form of government. In monarchy, the head of the country is a king or a queen. This form of government is hereditary. That means when the ruler dies, the throne is taken over by the son or his daughter. This type of government is seen in countries such as Bhutan, Saudi Arabia, etc. In traditional monarchies, the monarch has the supreme power. However, in a constitutional monarchy, such as in the UK, the democratic government limits the monarch's control. Second is dictatorship form of government. The dictatorship is a form of government in which complete powers rest with one individual, which is known as the dictator. The dictator rules according to his own wish and whims and is neither affected by people's wishes or the laws of the country. Dictatorship is generally oppressive and the people suffer much due to the high-handedness of the ruler. Adolf Hitler of Germany was one of the famous dictators in our history. Both the monarchy and the dictatorship type of government are known as authoritarian government. That means the whole authority is with the monarch or with the dictator. People have no say, no freedom of speech or expression. Such government does not accept the principles of political and equality or freedom of expression. People do not have any say in the formation of the government as well. All the groups and all the activities in the society are controlled by the central authority. People cannot even decide how to live their lives in a dictatorship as well as monarchical form of government. Students, the third form of government is a democratic government. The word democracy literally means rule by the people. It is a form of government of the people, by the people and for the people. It allows people to choose their representatives among themselves through an election process. People vote for candidates belonging to different political parties. The party winning the maximum number of seats form the government. Thus, a democracy is a government by the people. It is answerable to the people and has to explain its actions and decisions to the people. People enjoy various rights in a democracy. They have the freedom to express themselves. They can criticize or disapprove on any action taken by the government. If the people are not satisfied with the policies of the government, they can demand that the leaders step down and that a new government to be formed. Equality, justice, and freedom are some of the concepts closely associated with democracy.
You're cruising the Pacific in your luxury yacht when you come across a deserted island. Turns out it's not so deserted after all. There's a bunch of islanders arguing about who owns all the coconuts. You approach them and ask who's in charge. No one, they say. You ask them if they have a government or any laws. One of them asks, what are those? Well, you say, a government organizes people and makes laws or rules to protect their property and rights. That means you won't have to fight over the coconuts anymore. You guys want to start one? The islanders nod. There are lots of different types, you say. First, you have to decide who gets to have the decision-making power. One type is a democracy. That's when you give everyone decision-making power. A democracy can either be direct or indirect. In a direct democracy, everyone gets a vote on every major decision. It works best for small groups like the one here on this island, but only if you guys can agree to follow the decision with the most votes. If you keep arguing like this, all your coconuts will rot. There's also an indirect democracy, also called a representative democracy, or simply a republic. We have this type of government where I come from, the United States. We elect a few individuals to represent us as groups. We trust those people to make decisions in our best interests. If they don't, we can elect new representatives. An autocracy is when one person runs the government, making all the decisions. A monarchy is a type of autocracy run by a queen or king. Monarchs rule for life and are hereditary, meaning each new queen or king is a family member of the previous monarch, usually a son or daughter. In an absolute monarchy, there's a single ruler with no limits on power. In a constitutional monarchy, the monarch is limited by a constitution and laws. A dictatorship is also an autocracy. A dictator rules the nation by force, making all government decisions, sometimes with the help of advisors. Dictators want power for life. They like to take all the coconuts for themselves, if you know what I mean.
The democratic government can also be of two forms. It can be a presidential form of democratic government or a parliamentary form of democratic government. Under presidential democracy, the president of a state has significant amount of power over the government. He/she is either directly or indirectly elected by the citizens of the state. In presidential form of democratic government, the head of the state is also the head of the government. Countries like USA, Argentina, Sudan employ this kind of democracy. A democracy that gives more power to legislature is called parliamentary form of democratic government. The executive branch derives its democratic legitimacy only from the legislature, that is, the parliament. The elected legislature or parliament chooses the head of the government, who is known to be the prime minister, and may remove the Prime Minister at any time by passing a vote of no confidence. The head of the state, that is the President, is different from the head of the government, who is the Prime Minister, and both have varying degrees of power. However, in most cases, the President is either a weak monarch, for example in United Kingdoms, or a ceremonial head, for example in India. The Indian Constitution chooses a parliamentary form of government. In a parliamentary form of government, executive is part of the legislature and there is a collective responsibility of the Council of Ministers to the legislature.
Parliamentary and presidential. You'll find that there are three main differences between parliamentary and presidential forms of democracy. Those boil down to the leadership, the structure of the government, and the way that elections are done. We normally associate a parliamentary democracy with countries like Canada or the United Kingdom. On the other hand, presidential democracies are most often associated with countries like the United States. Let's take a look at the definitions. A parliamentary system is a democratic system in which the leader of the government is part of the legislature. That tells us the leadership component right there. A presidential system, on the other hand, is a democratic system in which the leader of the government is constitutionally separate from the legislature. All right, so let's analyze the icons. Let's first look for some similarities between our parliamentary and presidential icons. Now, there's parliamentary right there at the top and presidential there at the bottom. Now, the first obvious similarity is the fact that we have all of these stick figures in the background. That reminds us that the citizens rule. Both of these systems are democratic. The other obvious thing that stands out is that highlighted group in the middle. In each of these icons, we see representatives. That means that both of these are republics. You'll also see that there's a slightly larger icon in the middle there that seems to represent the leader of each government. But now let's take a look at the differences. First of all, on the parliamentary icon there, you'll see that the leader is part of that group of legislators in the middle. So that means that the leader in a parliamentary system is the leader of the legislature. So the leader of the legislature is also the leader of the country. Most often, that leader has the title Prime Minister. Let's take a look at the presidential icon, though. There's something very different about that. On our presidential icon, you'll see that there is a gap there between the leader of the government and the legislature. That, in fact, is the primary difference between a parliamentary and presidential democracy. The leader and the legislature are separate. And usually, that leader is called the president. Now let's take a look at how the election process works in both of these systems. Now, both parliamentary and presidential are, of course, both democratic. The way they do elections is significantly different. Now, we're going to start with presidential because that's what most Americans are familiar with. And in the presidential model, of course, it starts with the citizens. And the citizens will have an election, and during this election, they will vote for the president. They also vote for their representatives in the legislature. Now, in step 2, these people form the government, and the president becomes the head of the executive branch. The Congress becomes the legislative branch then. And in a presidential system, the executive and legislative branches are separate. Now, a parliamentary system also starts with the citizens, and in step 1, the citizens have an election where they vote for their representatives in the legislature, often referred to as the members of parliament. And in step 2, those members of parliament or legislators then choose their prime minister. That prime minister becomes the leader of the parliament. And in a parliamentary system, the executive and legislative branches are combined. Let's get some more notes to further contrast these two systems. In a parliamentary system, your leader is usually called a prime minister, although they can sometimes go by other titles such as chancellor in the case of Germany. In a presidential system, the leader of the government is usually called the president. Your legislature in a parliamentary system is usually called the parliament, whereas in a presidential system, the legislature is often called Congress. In a parliamentary system, the prime minister is elected by the parliament, not by a vote of the people. On the other hand, a presidential system has citizens voting for the president separately from the Congress. In a parliamentary system, your executive and legislative branches are combined. In a presidential system, there's strict separation of powers between the executive and legislative branches. If you've learned about the three branches of government used in the United States, along with the separation of powers and the checks and balances, that's a very clear example of what makes a presidential system stand out. In a parliamentary system, one political party is usually in charge of the entire government. Now, sometimes that could be through a coalition, but at any rate, still one group in charge of the whole government. In a presidential system, very often you can have more than one political party in power. At the time this video was made, the Democratic Party in the United States controlled the White House, or the executive branch, while the Republican Party controlled the Congress. In a parliamentary system, you usually have some sort of a ceremonial head of state. It might be a ceremonial president or a constitutional monarch. Queen Elizabeth of the United Kingdom is a great example of this. Her job is primarily ceremonial. In a presidential system, though, the leader of the government is also the head of state, so the President of the United States is also responsible for all of those ceremonial duties. In a parliamentary system, there is no fixed term of office for the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister could stay in office for 10 years or could be booted from office after just 10 days. As long as the Prime Minister has the support of their particular political party, that Prime Minister can stay in power. Once the Prime Minister loses that support from the members of Parliament, they can be removed pretty much immediately through a thing called a no-confidence vote. In a presidential system, on the other hand, the president serves for a fixed term of office. This means that regardless of how popular or unpopular the president may be, they're entitled to fulfill their entire 4-year term unless they commit a serious crime that results in an impeachment. And of course, the parliamentary model is the most common type of democracy in the world, most often modeled after the United Kingdom. The presidential system is less common and usually modeled after the United States. To summarize the differences, first of all, leadership. A parliamentary government is led by a prime minister, who is both the leader of the government and the leader of the legislature. The presidential system, on the other hand, is led by a president who is separate from the legislature. Let's talk about the structure of government. In a parliamentary system, the executive and legislative branches are combined. In a presidential system, however, they are separate. And finally, there's a big difference in the way elections are done. In a parliamentary system, your representatives elect the leader of the government. In a presidential system, the citizens elect the leader of the government.
The political scientists have classified government into unitary and federal on the basis of nature of relationship between the national government and the state government. Federal government is one in which powers are divided between the national government and the state government by the Constitution, and both operate in their respective judiciary independently. For example, US, Switzerland, Australia, Canada, Russia, Brazil, Argentina, and so on have a federal model of government. Unitary government. A unitary state is a state governed as a single power in which the central government is ultimately supreme and any administrative divisions exercises only powers that the central government chooses to delegate. The majority of the states in the world have a unitary system of government. of the 193 UN member states, 165 of them are governed as unitary states. Countries like Britain, France, Japan, China, Italy, Belgium, Sweden, Spain, etc. have a unitary form of government.
The unitary system gives the main powers to the central government. The central government creates the state, regional and provincial governments, and they are subordinate to the central government. The federal system shares powers among the central government and various state governments of a country. Both the levels of the government are answerable to the people separately through the legislature. Federal governments differ from the unitary form of governments in the way that power is shared. In the unitary system, power is with the central authority. In the federal system, power is allocated to the state and local level governments also. In the federal system, power is allocated separately to the central and non-central level governments and is codified in the Constitution. In the unitary system, there is codification of the power. In the federal system, the focus is on national and state issues. In the unitary form of system, the focus is completely on gaining power. Countries such as France, Italy, Japan, and the United Kingdom have the unitary system of government. The United States and Canada, Argentina, Australia, Belgium, Brazil, Germany, India, and Switzerland have the federal system of government.
The Constitution of India. The Constitution of India is the supreme law of India. It frames fundamental political principles, procedures, practices, rights, powers, and duties of the government. The Constitution of India was adopted on the 26th of November in the year 1949. However, it came into effect on 26th January 1950. 26th January is celebrated as the Republic Day of India. The Constitution is important for a country in numerous ways. First of all, it specifies how the government would be composed and how it functions. Secondly, it states the rights of the citizens and how they would be exercised. Third, it also states the norms as to how the government would conduct itself. Fourth, it prescribes the relationship between different organs of government and defines clearly the scope of their activities.
We have the freedom to follow any religion, to wear any dress, and to practice any traditions and customs. This is because India is a democratic country. Democracy is the system by the whole population of a country and people elect the government of their choice. There are certain rules that are accepted by all people of India written in a constitution. Thus, the constitution of a country is the set of written rules that are accepted by all people living together in a country. It is the supreme law, and each people of a country should have due respect to the Constitution of India. The Indian Constitution. The Constitution of India was formed for the people of democratic India on 29th August 1947 under the chairmanship of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. The Constitution of India, whose chief architect was Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, was adopted by the Constitution Assembly on 26th November 1949 and came into force on 26th January 1950. He was the chairman of the drafting committee. The Constitution of India is neither federal nor unitary, but is a combination of both. It is a union of novel type. While framing the Indian Constitution, the federal features that were included in the Constitution were: A. Dual system of government. It provides federal or union government and a number of state governments. B. Supremacy of Constitution. Constitution is supreme and both the governments need power from it. Need for Constitution. Most countries have a constitution and all democratic countries are governed by constitution. But it should be noted that a country that has constitution is not necessarily a democratic. Why constitution is written? What are the important features of a constitution? 1. A constitution forms certain rules and regulations that show the kind of country in which we are living. 2. A constitution helps us to set of rules and principles. 3. A country is made of different people with different belief. The main aim of constitution is to fulfill the belief of the people.
Students, that's all for the day. We'll discuss the remaining portion of the chapter in our next class.